Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on the eve of the tender deadline for our first emergency pod of the off season. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. And Jori, let's not beat around the bush. Jordan Romano is no longer a Toronto Blue Jay.
I don't want to say surprising cut, but I think in a lot of respects it is surprising. Like we both had him cut in our off seasons, but I said to you before we hit the record button. Now we did it for financial flexibility reasons more than anything else that we knew. But clearly the Blue Jays think that there is bigger problems at play with Romano's elbow, and they've decided that they are not going to commit 7 and change million to him, which I think is a big surprise.
Yeah, I think, you kind of hit the nail on the head, right? Like it's surprising because of just what he's been as a Toronto Blue Jay, kind of like that guy at the back of the bullpen that you can rely on, been one of the better closers in baseball for a handful of years at this point. And just to kind of like see the Jeff Passan notification come through that they were in fact non-tendering him is pretty shocking. And of course, his arbitration projection was 7.75 million. And for a team that is either operating with an extreme budget, they have more money to work with than you would think. If they're going to land some bigger fish, then you think that 7.75 million maybe doesn't come into play as much. But if they are kind of trying to stick to that shorter budget without adding a ton of bigger names or kind of going big game hunting in free agency, then that money does become really, really important to this team. And I think the injury has got to be the thing that you take away from this, right? Like they did not have confidence in him returning to his all-star form and being the lockdown dude at the end of their bullpen for 2025, which is obviously what led to this decision to them setting him free to be available on the open market for any team to sign.
Yeah. Now the question is, do you see any universe here where it's like a Brandon Woodruff situation where maybe he signs a 2-year deal and comes back?
Yeah,
Because I don't know if that's something that we should maybe be on the lookout for, but it's just crazy to me to just let him walk for nothing.
yeah, I think it's really interesting because if you are Jordan Romano, right, and so you get non-tendered at 7.75 million, and obviously the Jays and Romano's camp have probably had time to talk and negotiate a little bit, right? And like how much of a pay cut or I guess of a guaranteed are you looking for if you're him, right? Like would you have taken 210 so you get that $5 million AAV? But if you're the Blue Jays, I mean, are you really gonna add on that extra $2 million or more money onto next year when over that small amount of money this year? Like to me, it just seems like if they were going to get like a smaller deal done or a multi-year deal with a lower AAV, like they would have been able to do it before. Like I think there's probably a decent chance that we see Romano sign like a 1 year $7 million deal this offseason.
Yeah, it seems like almost a Kirby Yates adjacent situation, which I
Yeah.
think we mentioned a couple of times. I know I mentioned it a few times, either last episode or 2 episodes ago, however long ago it may have been. But this is clearly a guy now that has a big red flag attached to him.
Yeah.
And almost ironically, him getting non-tender is going to cost him money, I think, even though he's going to be hitting the open market, because all of a sudden now he's got this, elbow thing that no one really quite knows how bad it really is. But clearly, the team that is so intimately familiar with it is concerned enough that they didn't feel it was worthwhile to commit that kind of money.
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, them just acting on the ability to non-tender him says that his elbow wasn't where they needed it to be. And for a guy, I believe at the end of the year, he was in Florida at the Dunedin complex and working out with the team. And I believe there was a report like in early August where he was like trying to work back for the final couple weeks of the season kind of thing. And obviously that didn't end up working out. He had that elbow surgery that cost him the entire year. He had the delayed start to spring and then was just ineffective when he was on the mound. So I think you kind of combine that with the just the entirety of the situation with the elbow, the performance, and I think that it just kind of leads to a scenario where the Blue Jays are able to look into that and say, your elbow doesn't look as good as we need it to trust you as our closer in 2025.
And the other thing too, I believe I saw something that they gave him, like he had the chance to throw even this winter ahead of the non-tender deadline. This is not something that they haven't seen him throw since September. It sounds like this is something that has been monitored pretty closely over the last month. And, you know, the imaging maybe didn't come back clean, or maybe if he threw, the numbers weren't quite there, right? But for whatever reason, the Blue Jays see something in the elbow that brings them to the conclusion that this is not Jordan Romano anymore. This is the older, ineffective, you know, corpse of him almost, or shell of him rather.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Ben Nicholson Smith just wrote a piece for Sportsnet, just kind of pulled it up here, and it's he's got the quote in there, where it's like it's possible that he resigns in Toronto, and that the front office has already had chance to speak with them about possible deals for 2025, but that they clearly didn't see it eye to eye, and that some in the industry are quick to predict that he'll sign elsewhere. So, I mean, I think writing's on the wall a little bit where he's coming off a year that's so injury impacted, where I think that he's going to be able to at least point to his 2023 and say, well, that's the player that you're going to get instead of the guy that I was here. And that's something that the Blue Jays weren't able to bet on. So I think that's probably where he goes to a new team and like maybe signs that pillow contract to either, recoup his value and re-enter free agency a year from now, or he goes there, plays well, and or whatever, and gets traded at the trade deadline, or whatever that kind of looks like. But I don't know. Like I think it's a really good point that the red flags are going to go off for all the teams that are interested in him. And if his elbow doesn't look good, or if even if his elbow does look good, like I don't know what the odds are that he lands like with a top tier contender compared to him landing with a team with a little bit of cap room and the ability to let him kind of build back up.
Yeah, like this is the type of guy that there was talk that Walker Buehler and the A's had interest in him, and he
Yeah.
was like, "I'm not going to Sacramento." This seems like a guy that maybe the team like the A's, or maybe in a less disadvantageous, maybe you're talking the Rockies or the White Sox or another team
I mean, if
of
you
that.
you could, I guess, there's also the argument though that like a team with a little bit of money that wants to add a high upside reliever that can kind
Well,
of afford
that's
to take that risk, like the Rays or somebody, right?
that's the other thing is there's a lot of upside, no doubt. I mean, we've seen already what he's been at his very best, but if on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being that he's out of baseball in the next 12 months and 10 being that he's back to being an all-star, where do you lie on the fear of him being healthy, or maybe not even healthy, just being effective, because the health is now a huge question mark.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting question because I mean he is 31, he'll be 32 in April, and he, is a reliever, and reliever lifespans are not very long. And but you know what, like I mean, for a guy like him, looking at the stuff numbers, like his stuff was still really good in his short stint, and if stuff kind of comes online pretty quick, so I think the stuff is probably still there. It's just going to be about like maybe the health of that and being able to string it together for like 60, 70 innings again, right? So I mean, if you put me on the spot to pick between a 1 and 10 versus like all-star out of baseball and what the kind of the next year is for him, I'd probably put it around like a 6. I feel like, there's going to be some effective innings in there, but he's probably not going to be the dude that was, saving 30 plus games for the Jays in 2022 and
Yeah,
2023.
and I think that's not worth 7 and change, right? That's
Yeah.
kind of probably where the Blue Jays probably come to that conclusion, right? Is he basically has to be a 7, 8, or a 9 for you to be giving him that kind of back of the bullpen type of money. So you understand the thought process, but it still doesn't make it any less shocking, any less eye catching to me, the
Yeah.
actual decision itself.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we haven't even mentioned like he's from Markham. He's a Canadian dude who got his red run out, like was this just kind of different personality on the mound, like the chillest dude that you can think of off the field, and then just kind of got like the closer crazy eyes, like took on this different persona when he took the mound. Well, I wanted to, kind of as we were planning on putting this episode together, like one thing I wanted to talk about is like, obviously the decision is very important for the Blue Jays, but I mean also like this dude is a pretty relevant figure in Blue Jays history as the guy who's third all times in saves. He's a Canadian. He, like was Rule 5'd by the Rangers and returned to the team. Like he has such an interesting story. And I just like kind of want to get you, like, what are your thoughts on Jordan Romano overall as a Blue Jay and what he's meant to this franchise since he debuted in 2019?
Yeah, I think the heartbreak that you feel for the way things end kind of says it all in terms of where he lies in Blue Jays lore. I mean, I think back to, there was Osuna, but of course that ended sour. And, before that, I think of like Casey Janssen. It's really been a lot of ups and downs in terms of the Blue Jays bullpen and their top closers and their number one guys for upwards of a decade plus. And for Romano to really establish himself as a really top of the line closer. And then of course the fact that he's Canadian, so closely connected and that on top of it, it just it's so just upsetting, I guess,
Yeah,
like for it to end this way.
it's like one of those dudes that like you feel like I know some fans have probably a different connection with him based on some of the flack that he catches sometimes for where he
He
was.
is divisive, but I've
Yes.
never gotten why.
It's funny because like you look at the numbers and like what a pitcher. Like he is, a dude. Just looking at it, like he probably emerged into like a full-time reliever in the Jays pen in 2020, and of course that carried through 2023. And you look at his numbers, like in those 4 seasons, of course, one of them being 2020, so shortened. In those years, he had 97 saves, a 2.29 ERA, an 11.26 K per nine.
Like
So like
this is a rock. This is a really top of the line closer we're talking about here.
yeah, it's pretty incredible. Just, from him going from being like that guy that was a Rule 5 selection of the Rangers and returned to turn into one of the best closers in Blue Jays history. It is really quite incredible what he was able to kind of turn himself into. And I hope that, for his sake and for Canadian baseball's sake, that he is able to kind of keep up and be able to return to, if not his all-star form, but at least a dude that, can effectively fill a seventh, eighth inning somewhere.
He's an important part of any Team Canada down the line
Yeah.
if he is at his most effective. And maybe his most effective just isn't something that he's going to be because maybe he will never get back to that 2021, 2022 version of himself. But I think for the sake of baseball in this country, for the sake of any international, World Baseball Classic stuff, you want him to be right there with guys like Cade Smith, slamming the door in the eighth and ninth inning.
Yeah, the theoretical Canadian bullpen in the 2026 World Baseball Classic could be lethal, or it could be, in a really tough spot because like, there's Cade Smith, there's Matt Brash who missed all of this season, there's Romano, there's Zach Pop, and of course we'll talk about some of the other Jays guys here, but like I mean there is some pretty good Canadian talent in the bullpen, and Romano is like a massive, massive part of that.
Exactly, for sure. So I guess we'll see exactly what this means for him. I really wish him nothing but the best. It's
Yeah.
just he's a really likable character, really exciting guy to watch pitch. I think of him. He kind of got rid of it at a certain point, but he used to have that little duck down, and he'd be all funky on the mound there, and just a guy that I really enjoyed watching pitch and wishing him nothing but the best. And hopefully he's back, but doesn't sound like he will be. And if he isn't, then so long and thanks for all the memories.
100%, 100%. All right, let's talk about some of the other guys because the Blue Jays did, of course, non-tender Dillon Tate as well. They tendered Zach Pop, who was the other guy on the bubble, at least in our opinion, and came to a new deal with Erik Swanson that comes in about 200K shorter than his MLB trade rumor arbitration numbers. So I mean, Dillon Tate, his arbitration projection was 1.9 million. He's a guy that I think it's probably realistic that they would be able to get something done with him, like obviously shorter of that, like near $2 million number, maybe a minor league deal. Obviously, they claim him in waivers or off waivers to end the year. He pitches a couple innings with the Jays, and then who who knows what's going to happen? Like he was really solid in Baltimore, and then kind of had his velocity drop off last year. So I think a minor league deal would be appropriate if they are to bring him back. But obviously, I think the opportunity to combine Romano's 7.75 and his 1.9 to open up nearly $10 million of extra cap space, I think was probably Tate was probably the easiest decision, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's a guy that's either a minor league contract candidate, or maybe he's off to Korea, maybe he's off to Japan. It's hard to say. He's obviously got that prospect pedigree, but he's into his 30s, I think, at this stage, right? So, the sheen of that is well worn off, and he's been effective at times, with the Orioles throughout his baseball career, but really just kind of an extra body. And you know it doesn't really, I don't get the sense that he's really a starter anymore. I know that he maybe started a little bit in Baltimore. I don't even know by the end of it if he was doing much of that. So, if you need the body for innings in a worst case scenario depth role, I guess. But Tate's definitely more of a dime a dozen guy, and at just under 2 million, just didn't make a lot of sense to bring him back. So not really all too surprising with that.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think that there's much else to say about Dillon Tate. Zach Pop, we debated, I guess it was a couple episodes ago at this point, maybe 3 episodes, like however many, but we kind of debated whether that $1 million contract was worth having on the books. And I think you flipped
Well,
on
I
it
flip flop.
where
You
you
called me for
were,
flip flopping, and I think you also, like, I convinced you, and then I flipped
yeah.
myself. We were kind of I don't know. I don't think either of us are huge Zach Pop fans per se.
I mean,
So
like just the fact that he pitched, what was it? Like
I think
I,
it's
I
like
got the number
70
like
innings almost, or
50. He pitched in 58 games last year.
yeah, like he
Like he
pitched so
was on the
much.
mound so much for this Blue Jays team, and it just like really wasn't good. It totally fell off. The strikeout rate completely fell off. Like he has given up a ton of home runs in his career, and like for a guy, the $1 million to me, it's like, yeah, it's fine to have him as like a depth arm, but he has, no options left. So they have to pass him through waivers anyways to get him to the minors. And if he is in the Blue Jays opening day bullpen to start 2025, this offseason has been a failure.
I think I totally agree. Yeah, you can't have this guy be part of the equation next year. So I don't really get the urgency to bring him back, even if it's just at $1 million.
Yeah, I don't think the $1 million, like the $1 million, it's not gonna prevent you from signing anybody. It's not going to, you're not going to go out and sign a significant reliever for 1 million. But like realistically, like if they do, kind of come down to it and like say that they're bidding against somebody for like one of these middle of the road relievers, like I don't know, like I mean I used Keenan Middleton in my piece on Substack as a reliever that they could sign or somebody like that, right? And if the Zach Pop deal is the difference between offering Keenan Middleton $4 million and $5 million, like I mean it's a significant amount that probably doesn't get in the way of like taking that extra step to pay him that extra amount of money. But it all goes towards the luxury tax, and it all goes towards their final numbers last year. And it's just kind of one of those things where I don't think that Zach Pop was good enough to justify bringing him back.
Yeah, like I could see a universe where he doesn't even make it to spring training before getting DFA'd. He seems like the type that could absolutely be a domino effect guy because they sign some other reliever or they trade for some other guy for cash or something, right? So to commit the million to him, it's just $1 million. He's a super two guy, so you have so much team control left on him. He's not that young. He's not 30, but I think he's 28. I think he turns 29 next season. So he's really just, replacement level. When sabermetricians use the term replacement level, a picture of Zach Pop should have to come attached with any memo containing those words, because he's just kind of a guy. And it's fine to have guys. You're gonna need guys because you need replacement level innings when this guy gets hurt and that guy gets hurt and whatever. And you'd rather have him out there than say, you know, some, Kendry Rojas that's clearly not ready for the big leagues. But I just don't think it was even worth the trouble to make that commitment to him already. It's just not something you needed to do. And Zach Pop types are pretty dime a dozen that I feel like you could have found another Zach Pop and not been married to him through the winter. It's kind of seems like.
Yeah. I mean, I will say like, so obviously we both just were pretty on the side of, like not making this move, but of course, like I mean, it is just $1 million.
Yeah, it's not the end of the
It's not
world.
gonna like totally change the course of the Toronto Blue
I
Jays
here's
25
here's
season.
what I here's actually here's what I'll say. Here's what I'll say. The same way that Jordan Romano's non-tendered tells you a lot about the Blue Jays thinking, I think giving Romano that million also tells you a lot about a level of satisfaction with mediocrity. That's, I think, the bigger concern.
I he what do you think about this argument that Zach Pop, you give him the ability to start next year in AAA? Obviously, he has to clear waivers and all that stuff because you're going to probably have to, either DFA him off the 40 man to make room for some free agent signings, or you're going to have to just, try and cross him through waivers so that you can start him in AAA if you do add enough bullpen pieces. But obviously, like when you watch Zach Pop pitch, like his stuff looks pretty good, right? Like he's got the bowling ball sinker. He's got the huge slider, right? Like he's got the tools to be an effective major league reliever. It's just that he hasn't really been able to put it together. So I think when you look at like a 28-year-old with those tools, like I mean, you dream of a Clay Holmes kind of thing, right?
Yeah, of
With
course.
when he's out there, and I don't know if that's I know that's probably not where he'll ever end up. But I think if you believe enough in that stuff that you can try to at least stash him at AAA and try and work with him for another year or two for $1 million just to see if there is ever going to be anything out of that. And by the time he becomes a 30-year-old, then you probably are going to know.
Yeah, listen, it's magic beans. And again, I don't think I have an issue with magic beans. I don't know. I don't have an issue with magic beans for $1 million, but I think that, just how poorly Zach Pop pitched last year, and even the kind of looming threat of him being part of the 2025 bullpen is enough to scare me about the fact that they'll be bringing him back. I think you probably could have got him back on a minor league deal. I don't think that's the most unreasonable thing. And you wouldn't have had to pass him through waivers. And I don't know who's giving this guy a major league deal. Is he getting a major league deal? I'm maybe. And if he is, then it's kind of not your problem because that team probably ends up putting him through waivers anyways, regardless.
Are you ready for perhaps one of the most bad faith arguments that I will have ever made on this podcast?
I've never been more ready for it.
You want me to read you his AAA stats from last year?
Oh my God. Go ahead. Give it to me.
1.54 ERA, no home runs allowed, 2.80 FIP. He had 12 strikeouts in 11.2 innings and 4 saves in 11 appearances for AAA Buffalo last year.
So you're saying that because of those AAA numbers, you're buying what Zach Pop is selling? You're ignoring the sample size of how many innings is it at the major league level last
It
year?
was 48 and a third.
I can't believe it was. I said it was 70. I can't believe it was only four. It felt like way more than 40 something.
You know what's crazy as a right-handed reliever to pitch in 58 games and only
That's
complete
also
48 and a
crazy.
third innings.
That is
Like
also that
that's like
that's
loogie territory.
yeah. I mean, I'll tell you why he did that because he couldn't get out of innings. He's pitching in all these games and getting yanked because he's given up 4 home runs.
This is I was not expecting to discuss the Zach Pop decision this much. Oh man, what a day for, just, it's funny the way that these two Canadian guys have just ended up completely different and one
Totally
obviously,
converged.
yeah,
Totally
just
converged paths.
yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, before we get out of here today, let's, obviously Jordan Romano wasn't the only notable player to be non-tender today. There was a handful of other guys, notably Canadian Cal Quantrill was non-tendered by the Rockies. Kyle Finnegan, another closer, probably similar to Jordan Romano type. I mean, obviously, I think Romano at his peak is better than Finnegan, but Finnegan, racked up a ton of saves for the Nationals last year. Old friends Tim Meza, Adam Kloffenstein, they got non-tendered. Austin Hayes, Griffin Canning after getting traded, Brendan Rodgers. Um, Brian De La Cruz, Connor Joe. Like, I mean, there's a handful of moves today, and obviously, like, kind of mentioning them all. I just want to get your thoughts on like which one or two of those do you think is the most interesting, and which of them would you be most interested in the Blue Jays in pursuing?
Of those guys, I think probably of that whole group, I'd sniff around in Brian De La Cruz. The Blue Jays need some power. Blue Jays need a corner outfielder, and he's definitely not my first choice. He's definitely not my second choice, and we could keep going down the list, and he wouldn't be any of those choices either. But I wouldn't be opposed to him. But I think more interestingly, for a team that is apparently in on the pitching market, particularly the starting pitching market, Griffin Canning suddenly becomes a very intriguing piece to me. I'm not really sure how talented he is. Again, is another guy with a lot of prospect pedigree that hasn't really turned into much, but seems like the kind of guy I wouldn't hate to give a flyer on.
Yeah, I for a team that probably is going to need some starting pitching depth, I wouldn't hate that move. I'm not sure how much he was going to get. I know it was so funny, like when the Braves trade for him, and everybody's like, "Oh, the Braves fleece the Angels, like Griffin Canning, they're going to get the most out of him," and then just turn around to non-tender him. So, um, one name to me that stands out is Austin Hayes. Obviously, Baltimore Oriole. I think he was an all-star in 2022, just kind of, one of those weird, like one-time all-stars. But as the Blue Jays, we talked about like maybe needing a left-handed mashing outfielder. Austin Hayes in 2024, he had a 167 WRC plus against lefties. And for his career against lefties, he's got a 120 WRC plus, and that's a 277, 331, 469 slash line. Like he's a guy that I think if you're looking for that right-handed bat off the bench who can hit lefties, like he would be a decent option.
Yeah, it seems like there's some options if the Blue Jays want to go dumpster diving, but I definitely don't think that's the goal.
What about Port Hope's Ontario's own Cal Quantrill?
I'm a little less high on him than maybe some of the other names we've run off, but if they've got to fill that Canadian quota without Jordan Romano, I guess he'd be okay as a fifth starter.
Yeah, he had a really weird year where he was pretty good during the first half, and he was like doing this weird thing at Coors where he was better at Coors than he was on the road, and then he just kind of fell apart in the second half. And I think he was one of these guys that mixed in a splitter, and the splitter was really big to his success at the beginning of the year. I thought he was going to be the Rockies All-Star. Actually, I thought he was going to be their representative. Of course, Ryan McMahon ends up being that guy, and obviously he's been. I think in our history of podcasting together, he's probably been like a top 15 relevant figure going back to the 463 pod where I think we used to have a few debates about Cal Quantrill and how effective he is, but despite the peripherals not being great on him basically ever.
The one thing with him, I think, and me and my cross sport references, if you will, but I wouldn't hate a Max Domi, Ty Domi sitch where he's in the Blue Jays bullpen like his pops, but again, I just don't think that he's that talented. So I'm not totally sure where he would fit
I
in
wonder
the crux of things, but
I wonder how his stuff would play up out of the pen.
I mean, you'd figure it would probably play at least to a degree, right? Maybe he turns into something of an Erik Swanson type with the splitter. If the splitter was so effective, it's hard to really say. I
Yeah.
think a lot of Cal Quantrill's value is that he's a guy that can chew innings, and I think that an inability to chew innings as a reliever kind of takes away a lot of the value.
Yeah, he would have to kind of do like the Michael Soroka thing where he, moves to the bullpen and starts striking out like 37% of hitters that he faces instead
Yeah,
of
more or
instead
less.
of like the 16% that he did this year.
Yeah, it would have to be a pretty dramatic. It'd have to be a pretty dramatic change. But hey, there's a couple Canadians. You just mentioned Soroka as well. I don't know, maybe a couple Canadian options to bring in. Maybe they just put together Team Canada's bullpen a couple years early.
It's worth a shot if they don't end up getting any big free agents. Hey, let's just watch the national team.
Nah, I could do that. I could absolutely do that. It's not my first choice, not my second choice, not my third choice. Keep going down,
It's a
but
choice.
it's on the table.
It's a choice. All right. Before we get out of here, any last thoughts on Romano, Pop, Swanson? We didn't really talk about him, but I think we've discussed that. His second half showed in a really tough year for him that I think being able to get the deal done at a little bit less than what MLB Trade Rumors was projecting for him. I think you probably count that as a win for the Blue Jays, and and you take that into 2025 with him hopefully being able to return to the form that he had in 2023 and in the second half of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big overarching message is that this is stage one. This is step one of rebuilding baseball's worst bullpen last year. So this is a tough but necessary, bloodletting day. But this cannot be the end of things. This has got to be just the start.
Yeah, you can't cut bait with Jordan Romano and not replace Jordan Romano with somebody better.
That's the big thing.
Or somebody more reliable, we'll say.
Listen, Devin Williams.
Ryan Helsley. There's options. There's options. All right. Well, that is going to do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. You can find us there at the Bird's Eye View pod. If you're listening along on the podcast provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. You can follow us all on Twitter. I'm at Worden_Zach. Jori is at Jori Negin-Shecter, and the pod is at BEV_pod. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you later this weekend.